The air inside the forward operating base was not just stale. It was thick with unspoken fear, a fear that tasted like metal and dust. The mountains outside were not just rock. They were a living entity, a hungry, consuming presence that had been swallowing patrols whole for weeks. Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Gunnery Sergeant Alina Torres walked in. Her boots struck the plywood floor, a deliberate, measured sound that was utterly lost in the low, anxious murmurs of the men. She was small. She was quiet, unassuming. Nothing about her looked like the kind of legend men whispered about. Not in the dead of night. Not in the cold light of the operations tent. She was a rumor given human form. A myth the Marines created to keep the crushing weight of their anxiety at bay. The men glanced up from their maps. Quick looks. Dismissive looks. She was just another Marine. Too lean. Too quiet. At a separate table, the cluster of Navy SEALs smirked. Arrogance was a uniform they wore better than camouflage. That's her. The low chuckle spread like a virus. That's the one they've been talking about. They saw a woman. They ignored the soldier. They failed to see the fire that burned with cold, perfect certainty behind her eyes. Torres felt the weight of their disbelief. Not as a wound, but as a familiar, heavy coat she wore every single day. She was ignored, and she understood why. Legends are easy to dismiss until they save your life. General Marcus Steele, at the far end of the table, straightened. His chest was a riot of color. Ribbons earned across 30 years of combat. His voice was known for breaking men's spirits before the first shot was fired. He had heard the rumors. He believed in results, in action reports stamped and filed. He did not believe in ghosts. A legend, he knew, made soldiers believe someone was invincible. And invincible men got good men killed. He needed to crush this myth. He needed to find the crack in her armor, the flesh and blood beneath the whispered name. He pushed back from the table. The scrape of his chair demanded silence. The tent went still. His gaze locked onto Torres. Cold, unforgiving, a pure test of will. "You," he barked. The sound carried the full weight of his command. "Step forward." She moved, without hesitation. Every eye followed her, a pressing, heavy curiosity. "Name, unit," Steele commanded. Sharp, designed to cut through any possible hesitation. Gunnery Sergeant Alina Torres, 1st Recon, sir. Textbook crisp. "Not good enough," he said, stepping closer. His voice dropped, but it was heard by every man. "Call sign." The effect was instantaneous. The room stopped breathing. Weeks of wild whispers collided with the moment of truth. Torres didn't blink. She didn't fidget. Her face was calm, detached, as if she had lived this confrontation 100 times in the silent theater of her own mind. She lifted her chin, meeting the general's stare without a flicker of doubt. Her voice, stripped of all ego or arrogance, was level. "Steady, Spectre 6. The words cut through the tent, like a blade through canvas. Silence. Absolute. Heavy. Even General Steele, the man who always had the next move planned, had nothing to say for a long moment. He had dismissed the call sign before, in classified reports, stamped and buried deep. Mere exaggeration. A soldier's myth. But now, standing in front of him, the myth had a face. A uniform. Eyes that refused to break. The SEALs straightened in their seats. The smirks were gone. All that remained was the crushing, undeniable weight of two words. Spectre 6. The room knew. They knew the story of the ambush in Sector 4. The one they had called unverified in the reports. 12 enemy firing positions. Silenced in sequence. By a single Marine. Who moved like smoke. And brought an entire squad back. With not a single casualty. No wonder they're alive, the loudest SEAL muttered now. A statement of profound, humbling realization. Steele's eyes drilled into her. Testing for cracks. Searching for a single, fatal weakness. He saw none. Beneath the calm exterior was a cold fire. Not arrogance. Just certainty. A certainty that unnerved him more than any rebellion. I hope, Sergeant, that name isn't just smoke. The general's voice was lower now. A commander's necessary caution. It isn't, sir. The silence returned. It was no longer mockery. It was respect. Raw. Heavy. The general took a step back, his jaw tight. He knew he had been wrong to dismiss her. But he still feared the legend. Recon Bravo's gone dark, a lieutenant announced, hurrying into the tent. His face was pale. Last contact 20 minutes ago. Outskirts of the city. Ambush. A kill zone. The ripple of unease passed through the room. A silent unit on the outskirts was not lost. It was surrounded. Bleeding out. Steele's gaze snapped to Torres. The ultimate test of the myth. Sergeant Torres, you're on point. Yes, sir. She adjusted the strap of her rifle. Stepping forward with the calm precision of someone preparing for a long, familiar march. She was already in the zone. Her mind running calculations. Escape routes. Angles. Inside the armored vehicle, no one spoke. Torres sat near the door, her eyes closed for a moment of intense concentration. Not calm, but pure, relentless calculation. She was mapping the patterns of fire, the lethal rhythm of ambushes in the city's dark alleys. She was not anxious. She was determined. A single sharp point of focus in a world of surrounding chaos. The convoy rolled out. Tires crunching gravel. Engines low. When they reached the outskirts, General Steele's voice crackled through the radio. The only sound in the dead night. Spectre 6, lead them in. She signaled her team. Boots hit the dirt. Rifles raised. The city alleys yawned, dark and suffocating. A silent promise hung in the air, no one gets left behind. That promise was the only thing that mattered. Her only rule. Her sole command. A moral code that stood separate from any flag or rank. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. A doubt. A tiny, corrosive seed of intellectual skepticism that had been planted during the initial briefing. It wasn't about the enemy. It was about the mission parameters. They were off. Subtly, but dangerously. She saw the map grid and the objective marker. It felt wrong. Too clean. Too convenient for an ambush. She filed the observation away. For now, survival was the first and only order. When the night exploded with gunfire, she was ready. The first crack of a rifle. A Marine went down hard. Bullets ricocheted off stone walls. Chaos. Deafening. Torres pressed flat against the shattered wall. Her breathing steady. Perfectly even. She saw the damaged, half-collapsed wall. The handholds. The way through. Cover me, she ordered. Her voice, a sharp, clean cut through the noise. Instantly obeyed. No questions. Just fire. She sprinted low. Climbed with deliberate, cold precision. Rounds snapping close enough to tear the air beside her helmet. She reached the rooftop, rolled, came up behind the first sniper team. One squeeze of the trigger. Surgical. The shooter crumpled. She flowed to the next position. A shadow in the shadow, disappearing and reappearing like smoke. Below, the Marines felt the impossible pressure shift. The fire that had caged them faltered. They looked up, caught a glimpse of her. The ghost, striking from above. She's clearing them, a SEAL muttered. Humiliation and reverence mixed on his tongue. One by one, the rooftops fell silent. Escape routes opened like doors unlocking. Torres laid down measured fire. Each shot a path to freedom. A life saved. She returned to the squad. Silent. Her rifle still warm. Her face a blank slate. The SEAL stared. The smirks replaced by an absolute, profound silence. That's not rumor, one said softly. That's real. They rolled back into base. Every Marine breathing. Alive. Because of her. Inside the operations tent, the atmosphere was thick with respect. The SEALs stood along the wall. Quiet. The cockiness gone. General Steele waited. His eyes hard. No longer skeptical. Spectre 6, he said, acknowledging the name. The call sign, now an official title. You kept every man alive today. He gave her a nod. Small. Imperceptible to most. But to her it was everything. Respect carved out of fire. She saluted. Duty fulfilled. Silence settled. Later on the sandbag wall. She cleaned her rifle. The stars stretched wide. Indifferent. She ran a cloth over the warm metal. A small private ritual. A moment of personal, quiet redemption. She whispered her mantra to the dark. As long as they come home, the name is worth it. Her only rule. Her constant driving motive. The fire within her burned. Cold. Pure. Unshakable. But the seed of doubt the general had planted remained. Not about her ability, but about her duty. The mission. The lie she felt humming beneath the surface of the official reports. It was a moral challenge. A question of integrity. A silence she could not abide. The memory of the maps in the briefing room flickered behind her eyes. The designated target zone. The pattern of enemy movement. It didn't match the intel she had collected in the field. Not at all. There was a discrepancy. A deliberate, dangerous misdirection. And she was the only one who saw it. The only one who had the quiet certainty to question it. The full weight of the truth settled on her shoulders. A heavier burden than any rucksack. She had to know. She had to follow the doubt. No matter the cost. No matter the orders. No matter the legend. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Part 2 of 8. What was the last thing her brother had told her before the line went dead? The legend of Spectre 6 was not born in fire. It was born in ice. A frozen moment of absolute blinding terror. It was 1,000 miles from the dust and heat of the city. A deep-cover operation. The unforgiving mountains of a different, forgotten war. Torres was still just Alina then. A young Marine sniper. Cold. Focused. But not yet hardened by the kind of loss that changes the structure of your soul. She remembered the radio static. The frantic final transmission. Her brother, a forward observer on a ridgeline 5 clicks away. Pinned down. Outnumbered. She was the only one close enough. The only one with the skill to cover the impossible distance. Her orders were clear: hold position, maintain silent surveillance, do not engage. They were bad orders. They were safe orders. They were orders that would save her life, but cost his. Her whole body shook with an internal beat. A fight between the iron will of the core and the raw, desperate, tearing fear of a sister. The most profound anxiety she had ever known. She ran the calculations. Distance, windage, the rate of fire, the number of targets, the time remaining. It was impossible. A suicide mission. But the alternative was silence. And the silence of a dead brother was a sound she knew she could not live with. The final words, whispered through the crackle, had never left her. Elena, just. Then the line went dead. She didn't wait for the rest. She didn't need it. She broke formation. She slipped into the tree line. She defied every command she had ever been given. For 6 hours she moved, a ghost in the alpine dark. Her rifle, an extension of her own desperate will. She found him. Not dead, but barely alive. Her shots had created a path, a narrow, bleeding window of opportunity for his team to escape. She was disciplined. She was brilliant. But she was also broken. Broken by the choice she had to make. The choice that defined her. When she returned, she was court-martialed. Demoted. Stripped of her rank. But the men she saved, and the men her brother had saved, they gave her a name. Spectre. The ghost who appeared when all hope was lost. The ghost who defied orders for a higher moral truth. The name was a warning. A mark of insubordination. But it was also a badge of unbreakable loyalty. General Steele had cleared her record. He saw the potential, the surgical precision, the absolute focus. He valued the kill count over the disobedience. He promoted her, putting the rank of gunnery sergeant back on her shoulder. But the name stuck. Spectre 6. The sixth and final member of the team. The one they couldn't control. Now sitting in the operations tent, waiting for the final mission brief, the old feelings returned. The familiar chill of anxiety that wasn't about bullets, but about integrity. The general walked in. He looked different now. Harrowed. Stressed. Not the confident, unbreakable pillar of command. There were shadows under his eyes. The mission was simple, and yet it felt impossibly complex. Target, a high-value command post in the city's red zone. Intel, confirmed location, scheduled meeting of local enemy leaders. The objective, clean strike, neutralize extract. Torres listened. But she wasn't just hearing the words. She was hearing the silence between them. The deliberate, crucial omissions. The building is clear of civilians, the intelligence officer stated, his voice clipped and precise. We have full visual confirmation of hostile occupation. Torres' internal alarm bells screamed. 2 days ago, she had spent an entire 24-hour cycle observing that sector. Her team's raw data, submitted directly to the general's secured channel, told a very different story. The building was a compound, yes, but the annex facing the eastern street was a known community clinic. It wasn't hostile. It was civilian. It was full of women and children, often used as a makeshift school when the shelling died down. Her report explicitly warned against a full-scale saturation attack. It recommended a surgical, 2-man breach on the western wall. A silent, low-profile infiltration. The officer continued, describing the planned airstrike as the primary engagement phase. A full sweep. No survivors. A clean final solution. Torres felt the blood drain from her face. Not fear. Not panic. But the crushing weight of betrayal. The mission was not a clean strike. It was a potential massacre. She looked at the general. His eyes were fixed on the map. He didn't meet her gaze. He knew. Her report, the one detailing the clinic, had been filed in the system. He had read it. He had ignored it. Or worse, he had buried it. She raised her hand. The movement was small, barely visible, but the silence of the room was so absolute that the entire staff looked up. "Gunnery Sergeant," the intel officer asked, his brow furrowed with annoyance. "The Eastern Annex," Torres said, her voice low. "Can you confirm its current occupancy status, sir?" The officer cleared his throat. He shuffled the papers on the table. The movement was too hurried, too nervous. Another sign of a lie. "We have confirmed hostile presence, Sergeant. No additional status is required." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. A casual, brutal erasure of human life. Torres looked at the general again. Steele finally looked up. His eyes were cold. A silent warning. "Do not push this. Your loyalty is expected." She understood the implication. He was protecting the mission. Protecting the intelligence that had been paid for in blood and cash. Protecting his own career. He had decided the death of a few civilians was an acceptable cost for a high-value target. An ugly, brutal calculation of war. But Torres could not make that calculation. Not after her brother. Not after the cost of her own disobedience. Her moral identity was built on the refusal to let the innocent be consumed by the violence of the powerful. She lowered her hand. She did not press the issue. But her mind was made up. She would not follow the order. There was a truth buried in that compound. And she was the only one who could dig it out. The mission was set for 300. 3 hours away. 3 hours for her to decide how far she was willing to fall. How much she was willing to sacrifice. The memory of the court-martial was suddenly fresh. The shame. The anger. The realization that rank and law were sometimes the enemy of right. She looked at the men around the table. Her team. Good men. Loyal men. Who would follow the orders blindly because they trusted the general. They trusted her. And she was about to betray that trust. But for the right reason. For a higher, more painful loyalty. She rose from the table. Collected her gear. Her rifle felt heavy in her hands. A sacred object. Designed to protect. Not to enable a massacre. The internal conflict was an unbearable pressure, an emotional crucible that threatened to crush her into dust. Obey the order and save her life, her career, and her reputation as the unbreakable Spectre 6. Or defy the order, save the innocent, and become a true ghost, hunted by her own side. She walked back to her quarters. The air outside was cold. The stars were bright. But she saw only the dark outline of the compound. The civilian annex. And the lie that would consume it all. She began to check her equipment. Slowly. Methodically. Not preparing for the mission. But preparing for the defiance. The impossible choice. The ultimate fall. She had to save the innocent. She had to expose the lie. She was Spectre 6. The ghost who refused to follow bad orders. And the night was waiting for her truth. Part 3 of 8. How do you tell the difference between a necessary sacrifice and a deliberate murder? The silence in the barracks was not peace. It was the heavy, pregnant quiet before the storm. Torres sat on the edge of her bunk. Her kit was laid out. Rifle. Comms gear. Medpack. Everything was perfect. Everything was a lie. She had 3 hours. 3 hours to cross a line from which there was no return. She thought of General Steele. The shadow under his eyes. The way he had dismissed the intel. The deliberate omission. It wasn't a mistake of war. It was a choice. A calculated sacrifice of the weak for the perceived strength of the mission. She understood the logic. A high-value target meeting in 3 hours. Eliminating them would save thousands of lives down the road. But the cost of that elimination, the civilian blood on the street, would be a moral scar that would never heal. And it would fuel the enemy for years. It would turn every innocent citizen against the very forces sent to protect them. She felt a wave of profound disgust. Not at the enemy, but at the commanders who had lost their way, who had forgotten the meaning of the fight. Her internal struggle was immense. The legacy of her brother's final transmission. The words Elena, just. She had interpreted it as just live. Or just shoot. But now, years later, she knew what he meant. Just do the right thing. She pulled out her personal comms device. A small, encrypted satellite burner, not connected to the military network. She had kept it since the mountains. Her last lifeline. Her only way to speak outside the cage. She typed a single message. A coded sequence to a contact she hadn't spoken to in years. A former intelligence officer who had been forced out for asking too many of the wrong questions. The message was simple. Red Zone, East Annex, 300 false intel, need EYES. She hesitated over the send button. This was it. The final act of defiance. She wasn't just risking her career. She was risking a charge of treason. She was risking everything she had rebuilt. The proud certainty of her skill, the life she had fought so hard to reclaim. She looked at her hand. Steady. Unshaking. The hand of a surgeon. The hand of an artist. The hand of a killer. And the hand of a savior. She pressed send. The small, silent click of the button was louder than any explosion. The die was cast. Spectre 6 was officially AWOL in principle. Her loyalty belonged to higher code now. The minutes ticked by. Slowly. Heavily. She dressed in her gear. The ritual was familiar. But the purpose was inverted. She was gearing up not to execute the mission, but to disrupt it. To betray it. She met her team at the staging point. The atmosphere was charged. The men were focused. Nerves covered by professional rigor. They trusted her to lead them into hell and bring them back. They trusted Spectre 6. She felt a stab of guilt. She was about to lead them into an impossible situation. To use their focus for her own objective. She hated the deception. But there was no other way. She addressed the team. Her voice was low. Controlled. The voice of absolute authority. Listen up, the plan is good, but the city is a living thing. We will stick to the route, but I will be 40 meters ahead, running surveillance. If I deviate from the path, you wait. Hold your positions, do not follow, do you understand? The team leader, a seasoned sergeant named Miller, nodded. Gunny, with respect, 40 meters is too much. You're alone out there. I am never alone, she said. Her voice was flat. Final. It was an echo of the myth. A lie they needed to hear. A comfort they needed to believe. My path will be the one on the map, she continued. Yours is the backup route, the emergency extraction. I want you to memorize every detail of the secondary route, every drain pipe, every crack in the wall. She pointed to a line on the map. A path that hugged the western perimeter of the compound. The path that avoided the eastern annex. The civilian annex. Miller frowned. That's slow, Gunny. Too much risk of exposure. It's safe, she insisted. It's the only safe way out. The secondary route is for the exit, not the entry. She lied to him. She swapped the routes. She put the team on the slow, safe perimeter path, the one that would keep them out of the Eastern Annex blast radius, the one that would allow her to break off and complete her true mission. She felt the lie like a physical weight. But the thought of the children in that clinic was heavier. She had to save them first. Then and only then could the mission proceed. The armored vehicle engines rumbled. The ramp dropped. The cold night air hit her face. It smelled of dust and fear. And the coming betrayal. She moved out first, her silhouette melting into the shadows. A ghost in the dark. Spectre 6. Heading into the city. Not to follow orders, but to find the truth that had been buried alive. And the immense burden of this defiance was her final act of loyalty to the flag she truly served. Integrity. Part 4 of 8. She stood alone, but what came next, no one expected. The city was a labyrinth of death. Stone walls. Dead ends. The oppressive silence, broken only by the whisper of her own breathing. Torres moved with the absolute fluidity of a predator. 40 meters ahead. Then 50. Then 100. She was pushing the boundary. Testing the comms. Waiting for the inevitable call back. The primary route on the map was a straight, direct line to the target building. But it was a line that cut directly through the Eastern Annex. The clinic. She saw the corner. The moment of truth. The point of no return. She was supposed to turn right. To follow the line. To lead the team to the pre-planned kill zone. Instead, she turned left. A sharp, immediate pivot into a dark, flooded alleyway. A direction entirely opposite to the target. Miller's voice cracked in her earpiece. Spectre 6, repeat position. You're off course. Confirm correction, over. She paused, flattened against a damp, moldering wall. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Not from exertion, but from the sheer, terrifying determination of her disobedience. Negative, Miller, she whispered into the mic. Her voice was calm, deceptively steady. I've spotted a forward surveillance team, too close to the planned route, holding position. They'll compromise the entry. A lie. A necessary, terrible lie. One that bought her precious, irreversible time. Hold position, Spectre 6, Miller replied, his voice tight. We're moving to the secondary route for extraction. You are exposed. Get back to the perimeter. She had counted on this. She had forced them onto the safer path. The one that kept them out of the blast radius. Negative, she repeated. The intel on the surveillance team is too good. They're running a loop. I need to clear the sector before you move. 1 minute, hold fast. She turned off her mic. The comms went dead. The silence was absolute. She was alone now. A ghost cut loose from the chain. Her route led her away from the high-value target building and directly to the rear of the Eastern Annex. The civilian clinic. The alleyway was narrow, littered with debris. It smelled of rot and sickness. And life. She reached the back entrance. A heavy, rusted metal door. A single, dull light bulb flickering above. She pressed herself against the wall, listening. The compound was silent. Too silent. The enemy was inside the main building, laying their trap, waiting for the airstrike. She took out a small, specialized charge. Low profile. Silent. Designed to blow a lock, not a door. She placed it carefully. Stepping back. A soft, almost inaudible hiss. The lock snapped open. She pushed the door inward. The air inside the clinic annex was warm. It smelled of disinfectant and wood smoke. A human smell. A peaceful, domestic smell that had no place in this city of violence. She slipped inside, her rifle raised, her eyes scanning the dark corridor. She found the main room. A makeshift ward. Cots lined the walls. Sleeping forms wrapped in blankets. Women. Children. At least 24 of them. And on a small wooden table, a portable radio, playing a low, local language broadcast. She moved quickly. No time for fear. Only action. She gently woke the nearest woman, covering her mouth instantly, her eyes wide with terror. "Marine," Torres whispered in the local dialect. "You are safe, but the building is not. You must leave. Now go to the south gate. Do not stop. Do not speak." The woman looked at her, tears welling in her eyes. But she saw the resolve in the Marine's face, the truth in her eyes. She began to wake the others. Softly, silently, Torres watched the corridor, listening to the sounds of the night, waiting for the whoosh of the incoming airstrike. It was scheduled for 3:15. She had 6 minutes. She helped the women gather the children. No time for belongings. Just bodies. Just life. She pointed them toward a dark corner. "Follow the wall. Do not run. Do not make noise. Go now." They moved like ghosts themselves. A silent line of frightened, innocent life, fleeing a violence they couldn't understand. Torres remained. Her mission was not over. She had to confirm the intelligence. She had to find the proof. She entered a small back room, a storage closet. And there it was, the sign of the lie. Maps, not military maps, but civilian relief maps, marked with the exact location of the clinic, the women's center, the school, and next to them, a military radio headset. Not local, but standard issue. American. Someone had been tracking the civilian movement. Someone had known the clinic was active. Someone had filed a report confirming the civilian presence. And that report had been deliberately overwritten. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a physical, undeniable fact. She pulled out her camera, taking photos of the civilian maps, the headset, the evidence of the high-level deception, the proof that General Steele had ignored her warnings and chosen to sacrifice the innocent. Then she heard it, a low, rumbling sound in the distance, getting closer, the sound of an approaching aircraft. The airstrike was coming. The clock had run out. She had 3 minutes. She had to get out. But the truth had to get out too. And that was a different, more terrifying mission entirely. Part 5 of 8. But there was something she hadn't told them, not yet. The sound was no longer distant. It was a roar, a physical bone-shaking vibration in the air. The flight path was direct, unwavering. Torres sprinted out of the annex. She didn't look back at the fleeing line of civilians. She didn't need to. Her trust was in the fear she had planted in their eyes, the fear that would drive them to the south gate, to life. She reached the perimeter wall of the main compound. Her primary target, the high-value target meeting. The building was now a coffin. The enemy leaders inside, about to be eliminated. The collateral damage, now running for their lives. She found a small, dark recess in the wall. She pulled out her satellite burner, the encrypted comms device. She had 2 minutes before the first missile strike. 2 minutes to transmit the data, the evidence of the lie. She attached the camera to the device. The files were small, simple JPEGs of the civilian maps and the American headset. Irrefutable. She hit the transmit button. The device whirred softly. A tiny, high-pitched noise. It needed 30 seconds for the burst transmission. 30 seconds of absolute stillness. She knelt in the dark recess, her rifle across her knees. Her head bowed, her body coiled, ready to spring. The emotional core of this moment was one of pure, quiet grief. Grief for the soldiers who would fly the strike. Grief for the general who had fallen so far from honor. Grief for the moral certainty she had lost. The transmission bar was inching forward. 5%. 10%. Every tick was a prayer. A desperate plea to a world that had abandoned its values. Then the comms in her ear crackled back to life. A sudden harsh burst of static, followed by the tight, controlled voice of General Steele. Spectre 6, respond. You are off route. You are in direct violation of mission protocol. Confirm immediate return to team, over. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The burner was still transmitting. The noise of the approaching jet was deafening now. It was directly overhead. The ground began to shake. Steele's voice returned, harsher now. I repeat, Spectre 6, I am ordering you to abort your current activity and return. That is a direct command. Your activities will be construed as treasonous. Respond, over. Treason. The word hung in the air. A heavy, formal accusation. The price of her defiance. Torres looked at the burner. 50% transmitted. She had 10 seconds left. Spectre 6, I know you are in that sector. I read the secondary intel report. I know what you are looking for. Steele's voice was lower now. A terrible intimacy in his tone. It is a necessary compromise, Sergeant, for the greater good. Do not throw away your life for a gesture. This is your final chance. Abort. The general was giving her an out. A final terrifying choice. He knew she had seen the clinic. He was betting on her self-preservation. 75%. The roar of the jet was unbearable. She could feel the heat. The air was thick with the scent of jet fuel and ozone. She took a deep breath. The fear of death was nothing compared to the fear of compromise. Her brother's final whisper echoed in her mind. Just do the right thing. 90%. The jet was locking on target. A high-pitched electronic whine. The last sound the enemy leaders would hear. The last sound the innocent would have heard. 100%. Transmission complete. She snatched the burner, crushing it instantly under her boot. No trace. No communication record. The first missile struck. Not the main target, but the annex. The civilian clinic. He had lied again. He hadn't only buried her report. He had redirected the strike. He had made the civilian annex the primary target. To eliminate the evidence. To ensure the truth never got out. To cover his own tracks. The blast was immediate. A concussive wave of heat and dust and shrapnel. The ground rose up and slammed her against the wall. The world dissolved into a blinding white roar. Her ears rang. Her vision swam. A terrible, blinding pain shot through her left leg. But the pain was distant. Secondary. The main building stood. Unscathed. The high-value target meeting continued inside. Unaware of the sacrifice made for their survival. Torres pushed herself up, gasping for air. Her helmet was cracked. Her uniform was shredded. She was bleeding. But she was alive. And she was now the only one left who knew the truth. The general had sacrificed the innocent to cover his moral compromise. And the lie was still protected. She was now a true ghost, hunted by her own side, the broken soldier who refused to surrender her integrity. The second missile screamed in. This one aimed at the main building, the general's original target. The strike had been split. One to eliminate the evidence, one to execute the mission. The explosion was immense. The compound dissolved into fire and smoke. The mission was a success, but the war had been lost. Torres looked down at her leg. The bone felt shattered. Movement was almost impossible. She heard the familiar sound of armored vehicles approaching. Not her team. The sound was too fast, too aggressive. It was the general's response force, sent to silence the ghost. She had to move. She had to survive. The truth was out, but she was the only witness, and her final act of defiance had just begun. Part 6 of 8. Who was it that hunted her now? The enemy outside the wire or the officers inside the tent? The city had become her tomb, and the air, once thick with tension, was now choked with the heavy, acrid smell of burnt concrete and the terrifying scent of betrayal. Torres dragged herself from the blast radius. The pain in her leg was a screaming, relentless fire. She didn't allow herself the luxury of a sound. Not a whimper. Not a gasp. She used the wall of the demolished annex for cover. Dust rained down on her. She was a shadow of the Spectre 6 who had walked out of the briefing room hours before. Now she was just Alina. Bleeding. Broken. The mission was over. The targets were neutralized. The civilian annex was gone. The general's compromise was sealed. But the truth was loose. Somewhere, an old contact was reading the JPEGs. The final, irrefutable proof. But the general wasn't taking chances. The approaching vehicles were not recon. They were Special Reaction Force, the internal security unit, sent by Steele. Their job: search, neutralize, secure. Her own men. She knew the protocol. She was now a rogue asset, a threat to the integrity of the command, a stain to be wiped clean. She found a small drainage ditch, cramming her body into the cold, damp earth. Her rifle still clutched in her hands. Her only friend now. The SRF vehicles screamed to a halt near the compound. Dozens of boots hit the ground. The night was filled with the sharp, mechanical noise of safety selectors clicking off. They weren't looking for a fight. They were looking for a body. She heard Steele's voice, not in her comms, but through the loudspeaker of one of the vehicles. A chilling, amplified echo in the ruined streets. Gunnery Sergeant Torres, Spectre 6, this is General Steele. You are surrounded. Your actions have been classified as insubordination leading to treason. Drop your weapon, surrender now. We can contain this. We can still save your life. Torres closed her eyes. He was right. She could surrender. She could claim temporary psychosis. She could live out her days in a military prison. But the truth would die with her, and the lie would win. The internal conflict was over. She was no longer anxious. She was pure, purely determined. The choice had been made. She opened her medkit, tearing open the morphine syringe, injecting the dose into her thigh. A moment of fire, then blessed, immediate numbness in her leg. The pain didn't stop, but the fire was banked. Enough to move. She used the butt of her rifle to dig a small, shallow hole in the earth, placing her remaining comms gear inside, covering it with dust. She was going dark, truly dark. She looked at the SRF perimeter. Tight, professional. They were using thermal sights. They would find her soon. She had to create a distraction. A single, massive wave of chaos that would buy her the distance to vanish completely. She crawled along the ditch, slowly, painfully, towards the rear of the SRF deployment. She reached an abandoned vehicle, a burnt-out fuel-leaking hulk. Her last piece of equipment, a single fragmentation grenade. She pulled the pin. The sound was tiny, but in the silence of the hunt, it was deafening. She waited. 2 seconds. 3. The precise, trained count of a professional. Too long for a simple toss. Long enough for a delayed explosion. She threw the grenade beneath the vehicle, rolling away instantly, into the cover of a collapsed wall. The explosion was massive. Fuel lines ignited. The vehicle erupted in a pillar of fire and shrapnel. Screams cut through the general's loudspeaker message. The SRF perimeter dissolved into confusion. Contact, we've got a secondary. Fall back, fall back. Torres used the chaos. The blinding light of the fire. The screams of the wounded. The confusion of the hunt. She scrambled over the wall, dragging her shattered leg, moving like a wounded animal, driven by a fierce, undeniable will to survive. Not for herself, but for the truth. She looked back at the fire, the general's voice now lost in the noise. She was officially an enemy of the state, a ghost who defied orders. And she knew with absolute terrifying certainty that she would never be going home. Her new mission, survival long enough for the evidence to surface. The full weight of the moral cost was upon her. The heavy, final realization that sometimes the hardest battle is fought not against the enemy, but against the institutions you swore to protect. Part 7 of 8. Could a single truth weigh more than 1,000 lives? The next 48 hours were a descent into true shadow. Torres was a creature of pure survival. She moved only at night, using the dark, labyrinthine alleys as her sanctuary. Her leg throbbed with a dull, insistent ache, a constant reminder of the price of her integrity. She scavenged for food and water. A half-empty canteen from an abandoned outpost. Stale bread from a dumpster near a market. She was the hunter and the hunted, operating on instinct alone. Her own side was relentless. The SRF patrols were everywhere. They had sealed off the sector. They were running grid searches. They knew she was wounded. They knew she was close. But they didn't know the city. Not like Spectre 6. She knew the tunnels, the drain pipes, the secret ways through the walls. She was a part of the stone. She found a temporary hiding place, a disused water tower on the highest point of a derelict building, a cold, damp haven overlooking the ruined sector. From there she watched the search, the professionalism, the brutal efficiency. They were looking for a traitor. They were looking for her. She had a moment of profound sadness. She saw Miller's team, her own squad, moving along the perimeter. They looked confused, lost. They didn't know why their gunny had gone rogue. They only knew they had lost their ghost. She saw the look on Miller's face, the betrayal etched in his expression. He thought she had abandoned them, left them to fight alone. It was the greatest pain of all, to be misunderstood by the people she loved. She wanted to call out, to tell them the truth, to explain that the civilian annex was gone, that the general had lied. But she couldn't. The truth was too large, too dangerous. It would shatter their faith in the entire command structure. And that structure, however flawed, was what kept them alive. She had to let them believe the lie. She had to let them believe she was the monster. For their sake. For their ability to continue the fight. She felt broken. utterly and completely, not by the shrapnel in her leg, but by the weight of her necessary silence. She spent the daylight hours monitoring the radio chatter. Steele's voice amplified. His narrative of the event was carefully constructed. Spectre 6 suffered a psychological break, engaged a friendly SRF patrol, classified as armed and dangerous. The lie was already established, cemented in the official record. But then a shift. A new voice in the secured channels. Coded. Familiar. It was her old contact. The one she had sent the JPEGs to. The contact was a risk. Operating from a secure zone. He was calling the general out. Not publicly, but in the shadows of the command structure. The satellite images of the Eastern Annex confirm a pre-strike diversion of civilians to the South Gate. The intel report from Torres detailing the clinic was confirmed, and then overridden. The primary strike targeted the civilian building first. The general's response was immediate and terrifying. He was closing the net. The whole system was moving to eliminate the loose thread. Not just Torres, but the contact, the evidence, the entire truth. Torres knew she was running out of time. The net was tightening. She had done her part. The evidence was out. She had a final, singular duty now. To create enough chaos to ensure the contact could act. She found a secluded rooftop, overlooking the main convoy route back to the fob. A choke point. An absolute kill zone. She set up her rifle. The scope was steady. Her breathing was shallow. Perfect. The morphine had done its job. The pain was just a distant hum. She was no longer the ghost who rescued. She was the ghost who executed. Her final defiance. A sacrifice not of life, but of her own moral standing. She was going to fire on a friendly convoy. She was going to fire on American troops. Not to kill, but to disrupt. To force a shutdown of the main supply route. To create a massive internal distraction. To buy the contact the hours he needed to publish the truth. She felt the profound weight of her action. This was the line. The one she swore she would never cross. But the cost of inaction was the death of integrity. The death of the truth. She looked through the scope. A transport truck. The driver's window. A non-lethal target. A shot that would only cause a massive, immediate crash. She was hopeful. Hopeful that this final, terrible act of betrayal would ensure the survival of the truth. Hopeful that her name, now a stain, would eventually be cleared. Hopeful that the children she saved would be the final, silent witnesses. She took a breath. Exhaled. Held the sight. The convoy was in the crosshairs. And she squeezed the trigger. Part 8 of 8. Did the end justify the means, if the means cost you everything? The shot was clean. Surgical. The sound of the rifle echoed in the quiet streets. A single, sharp crack that signaled the end of everything. The convoy immediately veered. The driver, hit in the shoulder, lost control. The truck slammed into a concrete barrier. Massive. Loud. A perfect, beautiful chaos. The surrounding patrols dissolved into panic. An attack on the main supply route. By a rogue American sniper. The final, undeniable proof of Steele's narrative. Spectre 6 was a traitor. Torres did not linger. She had bought her contact the time he needed. She had sealed her own fate. She pulled back from the rooftop, dragging her leg. She had achieved her objective. The entire command structure was now focused on the internal threat. The roads were shut down. The communications were tied up. The contact had the window. She heard the sound of her pursuers, SRF teams converging on the roof. They were fast. They were good. She had run out of ground. She found a final position, a narrow gap between two air conditioning units. Her back to the wall, rifle across her chest. Waiting. She felt a moment of incredible, profound peace. The anxiety was gone. The conflict was over. There was only the quiet certainty of the end. She looked at the city lights in the distance. They were beautiful, indifferent. They did not care about the moral battles fought in the dark. She thought of her brother again. His final whispered words. Just do the right thing. She had failed the Corps. She had failed the law. But she had succeeded in the ultimate duty of a soldier, protecting the innocent and upholding the truth. The SRF team hit the rooftop. Hard. Vast. Rifles up. Spectre 6, drop your weapon, surrender now. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She looked at the sergeant's face. A young man. Loyal. Confused. He thought he was hunting a traitor. She raised her empty hand. A simple, open gesture. Her rifle, however, remained across her chest. Ready. I won't hurt you, she whispered. Her voice was barely audible. The truth is out. The sergeant didn't understand. He saw the wounded leg, the defiance in her eyes. He saw only a threat. He raised his rifle. Drop the weapon, Gunny, final warning. Torres knew what came next. She had forced this hand. She had created this ending. The lie needed her silence. The truth needed her sacrifice. She took a deep breath. And then she did the only thing left to her. The only way to ensure the general's narrative was complete, and his attention remained focused on her, the ghost, and not on the evidence slipping through the wire. The only way to save the contact. She slowly, deliberately, began to raise her rifle. A gesture of aggression. A final, necessary act of betrayal against her own self-preservation. The sergeant didn't hesitate. He fired. A single short, controlled burst. Torres crumpled. The pain was immediate and absolute. The lights of the city swam before her eyes. As she fell, her hand went slack. Her body consumed by the cold, damp concrete of the rooftop. The ghost finally at rest. The sergeant stood over her, his face pale, his confusion replaced by the simple, terrible reality of a soldier following orders. He had neutralized the threat. Down below, miles away in a forgotten bunker, a small satellite burner whirred softly. A notification flashed on a screen. The evidence, the truth, delivered by a ghost who paid the ultimate price. The general's narrative was complete. Spectre 6 was dead. A traitor. A rogue asset. But the truth she died for was already flying free. Unstoppable. Unreachable. Sometimes the truest act of loyalty is an act of treason. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.